The Art Center inspires creativity and contributes to
community well-being
through equitable access to
and engagement with visual arts.
We collaborate to offer exhibitions,
learning opportunities, artist development,
and cultural events centered on
art, artists, and art enthusiasts in the greater Corvallis area.
Welcome to TAC Makes. I'm here today with Nathaniel Praska, a Portland-based artist primarily working in painting and sculpture. His work will be exhibited at the Art Center's main gallery this spring. His exhibition, titled Heavenly and Earthly Paradise, will be on view March 14th through April 27th. Nate will join us at TAC for the Corvallis Art Walk on March 21st, where we will host an informal artist talk that will start at 6 p.m. Nate, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your exhibition.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is super great. I love to share about the work.
I would like to start talking about your practice in a broader scope. Will you share a little bit about how you came to painting and your pursuit of art over the course of your career?
Like probably most artists, I had some facility with drawing as a younger person, and then just family, friends, and people kind of encouraged that along. And then after high school, kind of being a little rudderless, I found a landscape painter in Bend, Oregon by the name of Ken Roth, an amazing painter who I love dearly. And he and I became friends, and he kind of took me under his wing. I paid for classes for a while, and then we just kind of became friends and hung out. And it was sort of like a studio understudy kind of for Ken. And yeah, I kind of like learned the ins and outs of oil painting that way, working in plein air. It's still a medium and a manner of working that I love. All of my favorite galleries when I go to museums are the Impressionist galleries. That's where I like to spend most of my time. So yeah, plein air painting is kind of my foundation, my background. I would show on galleries here and there around the country, with landscapes and things like that. And I really liked that kind of working. I love that sort of lifestyle. And that was kind of the beginning of taking art seriously.
So your approach has grown and shifted quite a bit. Can you talk a little bit about that transition? I mean, even with this work, it seems like the foundation of your practice still exists within it, but it definitely looks very different than maybe a traditional plein air landscape.
Yeah. So how did that change happen? Well, I kind of think it was always, even with the landscape paintings, everything was always sort of in transition. I discovered contemporary art in my mid-20s, so a little bit later than most artists. But once I did, it kind of opened up a whole new world and the kind of evolving transition of art making that I think every artist is constantly going through. It was kind of sped up, so to speak. So in 2012, I received a sort of a fellowship from the Calligram Foundation, who I think now supports Pica mostly, or has, if they don't still do, which I think they do. But they gave me an opportunity over the course of the year to kind of, through the fellowship and the resources, they gave me a year to focus on studying painting and to kind of, I guess, get to that next evolutionary level for me. That was about 12 years ago. And I really took advantage of that, went to a lot of museums and checked out tons of books from the library and sort of got myself up to speed for contemporary art and painting and even sculpture. But the fellowship was for painting specifically. And then I was really attracted to the works of Cy Twombly and Mark Tobey, the early kind of like all over kind of painting that's kind of influenced by graffiti and things like that, even decades old graffiti, bathroom graffiti and stuff like that. I find that kind of massive mark making really exciting. So mark making, even making plein air paintings, was really what made me excited. How to make a really compelling mark. Just something so simple, but it can be so profound.
I mean, that makes sense. Like if you're attracted to the Impressionist painters, like that's all about, the mark that creates the whole, right? And then moving on to someone that's maybe making something a little bit more abstract, like Cy Twombly, like it's still the marks, right? The accumulation of all of them and where they're placed that makes the composition. So it makes total sense to me that was a natural progression for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that brings me to like something I'm actually really interested in, the fact that you're making acrylic crayon for the show, and we're kind of jumping into like your most recent works very
Mhm.
quickly. But I'm curious, like moving from a brush to
Mm,
a crayon type object to mark with. Like, was that an important transition for you? Did that help your work
yeah.
evolve? Or
Super important. So I sort of left commercial galleries about 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. And I love brush paintings. I still do, but there's such a history with the brush. Bristles and brush marks is such a loaded, complex, and kind of well explored realm. And even painting with color, I just started doing that again a few years ago recently, because there was about maybe 4 or 5 years where I was just using cattle marker or paint stick on canvas, because I thought, oh, I've kind of felt like starting back at the beginning, making drawings again. I was making larger painting drawings. They were kind of a hybrid painting drawing, but I still kind of thought of them as drawings. And using the paint stick was a way to get away from the brush. It was a way to kind of like create my own field to work in, because there are so many good painters. Like I have friends that plein air painters and just painters that work with the brush that do it so well. I just couldn't do any better than them. So I kind of had to invent my own field or my own realm. For the last couple of years, I've been actually making paint stick, and although the canvases are primed with acrylic, the paint stick is actually oil. So I'm making oil sticks with beeswax, and I could kind of make them the colors that I need and the sizes that I need, which is great. And I can get the application quality that I want.
you're custom making your own crayons or
That's right. Yeah.
oil pastel, basically, right? A kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah. It's custom made. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about Heavenly and Earthly Paradise, and what that show means to you, and what the work that you're currently making, how it speaks to kind of where you are in your practice, and your interests as an artist in general?
Yeah. So this question I tried to like the content of the work.
Yeah, there's definitely. I guess I feel like if you started out with plein air painting and then you made this metamorphosis of style, that I think is really clear to the viewer if they know where you started and they see the work that you're going to be showing in the spring. Was there a shift in the concepts you were interested in and the figures and the landscapes that you wanted to depict? Like, has there been any interesting changes that have happened for you in that way?
Totally. Yeah. So there was this telephone pole near my work. Beautiful, like tag graffiti on it of just this cartoon kind of monster face. And I thought, that's so amazing. I'm envious of that, since it's not signed, or I don't know who did it. I'm just going to rip it off. And then that's just kind of what I'm doing now. Of course, that's not the whole story, but that's kind of, that moment was a catalyst kind of moment. And
You're
then
inspired by these marks in the real world, basically.
super inspired. Yeah. Just by this face. That's this absurd little face. And I really like that, once I left commercial galleries, I felt a huge amount of freedom to make work that could still be compelling and exciting to people, but maybe it wasn't necessarily for the living room wall anymore. It freed up what I felt like I could do. So these little absurd faces I would see around town, or the graffiti I might have scrawled under a bridge in Gresham when I was 14, like smoking cigarettes and drinking beer. That's the sort of thing I'm interested in bringing into the work now. That kind of, I don't know how to put it, but like there's angst, in the figures for sure. Like, the weird monsters or things you might have scribbled in your notebook in high school. The graffiti that I was interested in abstract sense with Cy Twombly became more like solidified in these almost comic book like figures. Over the past 3 or 4 years, I've been giving those comic book like figures landscapes to kind of live in or inhabit.
Well, I find it, it seems like you're kind of exploring freedom of youth, freedom of being a young artist without maybe being compelled by a purpose for the art. Like, the purpose isn't to sell, or the purpose isn't to like make it fit in the world in a certain way. You're kind of exploring youthful impulses of mark making. But it's also, I mean, for me, interesting, like knowing you live in Portland and visiting Portland often and seeing the shifts that have happened in the city over the past, 10 years. Like, I feel like some of that grit and some of that struggle is in the work as well. Like, so the landscape feels to be about place, about where you're living at the same time.
I'm glad that you say that because that's definitely the case. My wife and I have talked about moving to California, where her family's from. And I think that's a good idea, perhaps someday, but it would be so strange to work anywhere else besides Portland or the Willamette Valley, kind of anywhere up and down the Willamette Valley. I think this work could probably be recognizable. I'm really glad that you noticed the kind of the place element in it, because that's very intention, as much intention as I can put in the work. I would say that is an intention that's put in the work, that it's a very Northwest kind of feeling that I want to charge in there. And it's, I like smart work and I like abstract work and I like work that's clever, but I don't want that to, I'm interested in not making my work look too smart or clever. There's almost I don't want to charge it with like a fake naivete, but like hopefully it comes across as, that kind of earnestness that the adolescent has, or that kind of like filterlessness.
When people see the work, and this is an audio recording, so go see the work. But when you've talked about it being cartoon-like or kind of these youthful doodles, but there's definitely like, I don't feel a sense of humor with the work. I feel a sense of struggle and like there's a sense of a depressed place of like like trying to grow from sadness or anger or things like that. Like there's some really strong emotions attached to the work despite the youthful mark making. Coming from, I've never lived in Portland for a long period of time, but somebody who's visited the city a lot over my lifetime, like I feel like that closely identifies with the identity of that place. And I also love that your foundation is in plein air painting, which is so much about place, right? It's about physically being in the place while you're making the painting. And the painting's about the place. And so I feel like you're kind of doubling down on that again, even though the application is very different.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I think that I am kind of doubling down on the place element. It is, like I said, very Northwest based, very Portland kind of based, and Clackamas, which is just south of Portland, which is where I spent most of my time growing up. It's almost as though I were to take a landscape painting or an impressionist painting, and my pieces are just kind of like, I'm just thinking about this now, but it's almost as though they're just zoomed up really close to a figure or a weird face or like a tree or something like that, instead of the scene in its entirety. And the scene in its entirety is sort of all of the pieces together forming one work. Although they're separate canvases, it's almost as though that the exhibit is kind of meant to be seen as one thing, each piece strongly informing the next and contextualizing the next. It's almost as though it were just a landscape painting of my lived experience that I just kind of explode into many parts and then blow it up in scale, I suppose.
To that point, like these are large pieces. Can you talk a little bit about why you choose that scale, why that's important to you, and like how that changes the way you work and have to move to create the pieces?
Yeah. So the scale of a couple of things. When I went through that fellowship 12 years ago or so, it was a painting fellowship, but I studied sculpture mostly. Minimalist and post-minimalist sculpture, Richard Serra, I think Tony Smith, and Bruce Nauman. And I just loved that work. And it was one thing I noticed about that work is how well it was scaled to the galleries or to the exhibition spaces. And I think paintings are famously, usually, contemporary paintings do better, but sometimes they're too big. I think it's just, unnecessarily large. Paintings have never been really scaled to spaces in the same way, traditional paintings. I just started thinking about making work that was scaled in a way that I would think of as effective in a similar way to the sculpture, where the emphasis of the sculpture is the piece in relationship to your body, like a Richard Serra piece or whatever. Like you're supposed to, you feel its presence relative to your body, to yourself. And I thought about scaling painting in a similar way. And I think I've gotten the effect that I want out of it, just to have a more powerful presence in the space. That's to say that not making the work, it's large, but I don't mean to make it, big just for the sake of being big. Trying to be appropriately scaled to the gallery and, to the human
Yeah, definitely.
being.
Will you talk a little bit about the sculpture pieces that you're planning on showing?
Yeah.
And how they interact with your 2D work and like kind of how you think about you. I like that you said that you see the collection, as a single experience, which I think is really powerful, especially when you're taking into account the gallery space you're making the work for. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the positioning and the creation of sculpture and how it influences how people see the paintings?
Yeah, totally. The sculpture, I kind of like to think of it as sort of tumbling out of the paintings and just being on the ground. The interaction between the paintings and the sculpture, I find to be really satisfying. I do think of it as an extension of the painting together, and they're almost meant to just be together. I'm exhibiting sculpture on its own, the Glean exhibit next week here in Portland. And that's a whole new experience for me because I've never done it. Going in there and thinking the work that's coming to terms with like, oh, okay, so this is what just exhibiting sculpture is like. Because I'm so used to having it in the context of paintings.
Does it feel lonely?
Yeah, it does. It does. But I'm just coming to understand it in a new way. But it does feel lonely. The sculpture, the way that I make it has expanded since I've done the Glean program at going to the dump and collecting a bunch of materials and making work out of it. I've been able to make a stronger formula to make lighter and more flexible work so I can scale it up. And made out of chicken wire and joint compound and things like that. Spray paint and house paint. It is its own thing, but I think of it as a complement to the painting, at least at this point. So the sculpture is sort of just, right now it's objects that I would find in a painting, or maybe objects that I want to put in a painting, but I can't figure out how to get the angle right. So I'll make a sculpture out of it.
Yeah. You learn about the object by recreating the object.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So for our exhibit, I'm gonna make like a kitchen sink and just have it on the ground. I'm making another fire piece for it. I think I'll make like a tire or a wheel, and then, we'll probably mess it up somehow.
In the best way possible, I'm sure. Kate, thank you so much for talking with me today. I appreciate your time and the insight you've given to this exhibition.
Oh yeah, thank you this is great. I love the talk.
Heavenly and Earthly Paradise will be on view March 14th through April 27th in the main gallery at the Art Center in Corvallis, Oregon. The reception will be held on March 21st from 5:30 to 7 in the main gallery. And Nate will be joining us that night. Thank you for listening to TAC Makes. This is a new creative project at the Art Center, and I hope you enjoy our learning curve as much as we do. You can find more episodes on YouTube and Spotify and on our website, theartscenter.net. That's arts with an S.